Hi, my name is Sheila Corona. Welcome to Sassy Seer Sheila and New Light Streaming Love, as this will be seen on both channels. This is The Night I Wanted My Story to End by Jason Gray. And it was just penned on, written 5/30/2026. In 2002, I was 27 years old, still 2 years away from walking through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous for the very first time. 2 years away from finding recovery. 2 more years of unimaginable hell. 2 years away from discovering that life was not finished with me. But on that night, I could not see any of that. All I could see was ruin. Crystal methamphetamine had consumed my life. Not just my life, my thinking, my judgment, my identity, my ability to imagine a future. The addiction had slowly dismantled everything I cared about and convinced me that I was somehow still in control. I was not. By then, the house was being sold. My marriage had collapsed. My wife had moved back in with her mother. She had taken my firstborn son with her. The future I had imagined for myself as a husband and father had shattered. I remember walking through those empty rooms. The silence was unbearable. Not the peaceful silence of a quiet evening, the silence of absence, the silence of consequences, the silence that remains after a life has fallen apart. Every room felt haunted. I could still see where furniture had once been, still hear echoes of conversations, still remember laughter, still remember dreams, but the people were gone. I was alone. I changed the locks on the house. I remember that detail vividly, as though I was sealing myself inside a chapter that was about to close forever. That evening, I sat alone at the kitchen table. A grown man, 27 years old, broken in ways I did not yet understand. In front of me was my Bible. I remember staring at it through tears. The tears would not stop. Not because I was afraid, because I was exhausted. Exhausted from the addiction, exhausted from the lies, exhausted from disappointing everyone around me, exhausted from disappointing myself, exhausted from carrying a life that felt too heavy to continue carrying. I remember talking to God, not praying, talking. The way a defeated man talks when there is nothing left to hide. No religious performance, no carefully chosen words, just honesty, raw honesty. I told him I was tired. I told him I was sorry. I told him I had failed as a husband, failed as a father, failed as a man. I remember looking around that empty house and believing I was looking at the final evidence of everything I had destroyed. The overwhelming feeling was regret. Regret for every broken promise. Regret for every selfish decision. Regret for every opportunity I had wasted. Regret for becoming someone I no longer recognized. I believed my story was ending. What I did not know was that it was not. The next part of the story comes from others, from conversations, from memories that do not belong entirely to me, and from my medical records I would eventually read. What I know is that nearly 24 hours passed, an entire day. The sun rose, people went to work, traffic moved. Life continued, and I remained inside that silent house. Eventually, my father-in-law arrived, a retired firefighter, a man who had spent years responding to emergencies, a man who had seen tragedy before. On that day, he found his own son-in-law. I have often wondered what he felt in that moment, what crossed his mind, what it was like to open that door. Emergency crews were called, paramedics arrived, firefighters arrived. The silence that had filled the house was suddenly replaced by urgency, by people moving quickly, by people fighting against time itself. Years later, I would obtain portions of my medical records. Those pages were difficult to read, cold, clinical, matter of fact. They also described one of the most important moments in my life. According to those records, I had no detectable pulse when I was found. My body was cold. The situation was critical. The people who arrived that day did not know my story. They did not know about the addiction. They did not know about the heartbreak. They did not know about the despair. What they knew was that a human life was in front of them, and they went to work. Reading those records years later left me sitting in silence because, for the first time, I understood how close I had come. The records showed that the people who arrived that day refused to stop fighting. Well, I'm really glad. They continued working long after I had given up on myself. For years, I carried shame about that night. Today, I carry something else: gratitude. Gratitude for people whose names I may never know: paramedics, firefighters, doctors, nurses, my father-in-law. People who became part of my story without ever realizing it, because while I believed my life was over, they were fighting for one more chapter, then another and another. The most extraordinary part of the story happened somewhere beyond the reach of medical records, beyond charts, beyond procedures, beyond explanation. For nearly 24 years, I have wrestled with what I have experienced, with what I experienced. I have questioned it, analyzed it, doubted it, defended it, yet the memory remains. I remember a light, not sunlight, not the light of a lamp, a living light, a presence more than an illumination. The overwhelming feeling was peace, not relief, not happiness, peace. A peace so profound that every burden I had carried seemed to vanish instantly. The addiction, the shame, the loneliness, the heartbreak, gone. For the first time in years, there was no noise inside me, only stillness. I remember feeling as though I had arrived somewhere familiar, not somewhere new, somewhere remembered, a place I somehow knew, despite having no explanation for why. There was no fear, no confusion, no panic, only a profound sense of home. The kind of home that exists beyond houses, beyond cities, beyond lifetimes. I remember feeling completely known. Every failure, every wound, every mistake, nothing hidden, nothing condemned, simply known, and somehow loved anyway. The certainty of that experience remains difficult to describe. Not certainty about religion, not certainty about doctrine, but certainty that whatever exists beyond this life is far greater, far more compassionate, and far more beautiful than I had ever imagined. I was not allowed to stay. That realization carried a sadness I still struggle to describe because I did not want to leave. I did not want to return to the pain, to the addiction, to the brokenness, but the message was unmistakable. My story was not finished. There was still something left for me to do. At the time, I could not imagine what that might be. Today, more than 2 decades later, I often wonder if part of that unfinished work is this very page. The writing, the remembering, the willingness to tell the truth, the courage to speak openly about the darkness so others might find a path through their own. I cannot prove what I experienced. I cannot place it in a laboratory. I cannot hand it to another person and say, see what I saw? All I can do is tell you what I remember. And what I remember is this. The man sitting at that kitchen table in 2002 believed his story was ending. He was wrong. Recovery was still ahead. Sobriety was still ahead. Life was still ahead. 2 more sons were still ahead. The books were still ahead. The lessons were still ahead. The people I would help were still ahead. Even the man writing these words was still ahead. The darkness convinced me there was nothing beyond that night. The darkness lied. And perhaps that is why I continue writing these memories now. Because somewhere there is another person sitting alone in the wreckage of their own life, convinced there is no future waiting for them. I want them to know what I could not know in 2002. The story is not over, not yet. Today I am 51 years old. And if I am being honest, returning to that night is still difficult. People sometimes assume that the passage of time erases pain. It does not. Time changes pain. It softens some edges, adds perspective, creates understanding, but certain memories remain exactly where they have always been, waiting, silent, unchanged. This is one of those memories. Even now, more than 2 decades later, I can close my eyes and find myself back in that kitchen, back at that table, back inside that silence, back inside the mind of a man who had become convinced there was no future. Writing about it is harder than many people realize. Every sentence requires me to walk back into rooms I spent years trying to leave behind. I sit beside a younger version of myself and remember what it felt like when hope disappeared. Some days I can write about it. Other days I have to step away from the page because despite everything that happened afterward, despite the recovery, despite the years, despite the growth, part of me still aches for that young man. Part of me still wishes I could walk back into that house and sit down across from him. I would tell him to hold on. I would tell him that the darkness is lying. I would tell him that his son will grow up. I would tell him that one day he will write these words. I would tell him that the life he believes is ending has not even begun to reveal itself yet. There is something else I have rarely spoken aloud. Something that happened long before 2002, long before addiction, long before marriage, long before divorce, long before I became the man sitting at that kitchen table. When I was 15 years old on Christmas Eve, I experienced something that would leave a mark on me for the rest of my life. An experience that forced me to confront mortality far earlier than most people ever do. An experience that in many ways became the first chapter in a story I did not yet understand. I have carried that memory for decades, just as I carried the memory of 2002. At some point, I will tell that story as well. Not today. That chapter deserves its own telling, its own space, its own truth. Oh my. I just got to wave. As I sit here now at 51 years old, I can see something that the younger versions of myself could not. The threads connect. The frightened 15-year-old boy, the broken 27-year-old man, the recovering addict, the father, the writer, the man sitting here now. All of them are me. All of them survived things they believed they could not survive. All of them carried wounds they thought would never heal, and all of them somehow continued forward. That is perhaps the greatest lesson I've learned from revisiting these memories. Life is rarely one event, one collapse, one triumph, one recovery. Life is a series of chapters, some beautiful, some devastating, some so dark cannot imagine ever finding your way through them. Yet chapter after chapter continues to arrive, and yet, somehow, against all odds, we continue turning the page. Jason Gray. Well, Jason, let me just say, my darling love, I have come to feel that even the most horrific of experiences, and trust me, I've had a few myself, it, at least for me in this lifetime, have served me well. I would never have imagined that as I moved through them. Abuse, those sorts of things never sound like anything somebody would set up for themselves. However, it all depends on the perspective one is holding. I can see with my hindsight now what I couldn't see then. That is what you're describing here as well. For me, it served to make me who I am in these moments of now. I encourage everyone to feel into those sorts of things for themselves and just ask yourself the questions. I mean, let's take, for example, parenting, upbringing. My mother just wasn't available. She was never there emotionally, physically, in any way, really much. We sort of raised ourselves, feral children. And one could say, oh, how awful. Trust me, my grandmother did many times. But I am one of the most resourceful people I've come across. And I know that it is part and parcel due to that, at any rate. My gratitude uh, to Jason. Until we meet again, my friends.